Hey guys, I actually found a comment that I had tucked away in the back of my brain, completely forgot about it, but this is from Musician Problems, good name. Hi Joanna, could you maybe do a video on teaching? I teach flute along with clarinet and sax, and I'm wondering if you could do a video on what to expect, as I often feel as though I expect too much from my students too soon. Love your videos though, thank you. Here's my take on it. The most obvious issue here is that us humans have a kind of a weird way of seeing other humans. It's actually more natural for us to just stand in our own shoes and basically judge everyone around us and be like, well, if I can do what I do, why can't you do it? I don't know if you guys are in contact with many young families. I am, because my church has a lot of young families. I have seen some parents talk to their children after their children have fights with other children and explain to their kids that other people, one, are not just like you, and two, you are not the center of the universe. So for us as teachers, because no one really teaches you how to teach, I think it's very easy to fall into these old bad habits where we look at our students and we're like, well, if I can do it, why can't you? It's like a subconscious thing. I love to believe that we are all on the same musical journey. It's just some of us are further along the road than others. You can't look at someone who's behind you and say, well, why aren't you where I am at now? That makes no sense. You really have to think back to when you were a student, and you have to think back to how hard it was to learn new concepts, like how difficult it was to learn double tonguing, whereas maybe now double tonguing is like second nature to you. But think back to when you first started practicing it. It was hard, right? I think you'll have a lot more empathy for them if you really put yourself in their shoes. Don't put them in your shoes. A couple of other problems that might come out of expecting too much from your students or figuring out how to pace your students is, one, the student could just be super quiet. I am totally fine with super quiet people. They make the world go round. There really are people who just enjoy listening to other people talk. When you are in a private lesson situation, things are a little bit different. The teacher is really looking for verbal cues, facial expression cues, signs that you understand what we're talking about. And it really is very confusing for the teacher when we teach you a concept verbally and then we show it to you, and then you have absolutely no expression on your face and you just bring up your flute and you just regurgitate everything that we told you. We don't know if you really got it. I find that if the student looks like they're thinking about it for a moment, you know, like, oh, okay. Or if they ask more questions like, oh wait, I don't get it. It's a lot easier for us as the teachers to figure out what it is about the concept that we are teaching you that you don't understand. I think this happens the most to students whose home life they're just used to listening to their parents and just not refuting anything and not questioning anything. Because to them, questioning is a form of disagreement, especially if your student is a child. The child will treat you as the teacher the way they treat their parents. I understand that for that type of student, it's really hard to break out of that mold, but try. Don't be afraid to emote. And I understand that's scary to show your feelings. I understand that your teacher is an authority figure to you and you don't want to displease them. But teaching a blank face is seriously the hardest thing to do as a teacher. We just cannot gauge what is happening in your brain. It makes us very confused as to what to teach you. I either end up teaching the same thing over and over again, or suddenly I'll realize that you actually did understand it and we can move on. You know, it's really frustrating. The second big thing that we as teachers often forget is that not everyone's learning pattern is the same. I had a student, we were working out of the Rubank books. Each page or every other page is like a lesson. She would spend weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks on one lesson, simply because she would just keep forgetting what I taught her. And every time I taught her the same thing, to her it was like it was completely new. But then suddenly we will hit a couple of weeks where she just nails every lesson, like just, and then after a couple of weeks, she'll hit another plateau, and weeks and weeks and weeks she'll just be on one lesson again. I actually wonder if maybe she's the type of student who actually needs more than one lesson a week, you know, to really like help her learn new concepts. It's kind of like how you learn new concepts pretty quickly at school because you see your teacher every day or almost every day. We don't get to do that as private instructors. At least in North America, maximum we see our students once a week, maximum. And if they are a younger student, typically you only see them for half an hour. So for an entire month, you're only seeing your student for 2 hours. This is why it's very difficult to expect a lot of students. The third thing is that because these students are people, okay, and they're going through stuff at school, they're going through stuff at home, keep in mind, you only see them half an hour to an hour once a week. So you don't know what has happened in all of the other hours of the month that you're not there with them. You don't know if there has been a fight at home, you know, a really bad argument at home that makes them feel really down. You don't know if maybe they won some sort of championship for something else and so they're super elated about that. You don't know if they're in love with someone. Maybe that someone asked them out, or maybe that someone rejected them. Okay, they're bringing all of those feelings and experiences into your lessons. So there are just going to be some lessons where some students are just mentally not gonna be there. In those cases, what I like to do is focus on tone, focus on repetitive material so that I can still teach them things even in their super emotional or super shut down state. I myself went through a time when I was about 16 where I was pretty much depressed. I was never diagnosed. Long story short, my dad had an anxiety-induced heart attack when I was 16 and almost died. He actually did die and the doctors revived him. I think my teacher very much did not know what to do with me because I was pretty much a robot for about a year. And I understand how difficult it is to teach students like that. So for the first couple minutes, it will really do your whole lesson a lot of good if you ask your student what's going on, how are things going. But you always have to give them the option of not telling you because sometimes it's very sensitive stuff that's happening to them and they don't want to tell you. Even if they don't feel like telling you, at the very least they don't feel that they need to hide from you. And that relieves so much anxiety and so much tension that it makes it a lot easier to teach them during that lesson. The last thing I wanted to talk about is this thing about anxiety. As a teacher, if you think back to when you played for your teachers, you always had a little bit of anxiety. It is very easy to forget that our students also have that same feeling, that same anxiety when they play for us. I think in the lesson, you will never get 100% the way that they play in the practice room. Maximum, you get 95%. Usually you get about 85% of how they play in the practice room because of anxiety. And that little 5 to 15% of anxiety will make them do things like play way faster than they think that they're playing. Anxiety makes time go slower, which means that you play faster. There's all this weird relative stuff. So your students aren't just rushing the piece just to rush it. They're probably rushing it because you're sitting there in front of them. And they probably didn't rush it like that in their practice sessions. That little bit of anxiety will never go away though. So instead of just wishing for it not to be there, we as teachers need to deal with it. You want to get your students to directly counteract the anxiety instead of just kind of avoiding it. I have found that just telling them to play a hair slower pretty much fixes it. It allows them to think about what they're playing. They just feel like they have more time. If you don't give them that feeling of having more time, everything is just gonna be a blur. They're not gonna be thinking about support. They're not gonna be thinking about breathing. They're not gonna be thinking about where their fingers are going. It's all gonna be only muscle memory, which is very dangerous. When they look at their etude, all of the notes are just gonna blur together. But if you give them that feeling of, oh, I can go a little bit slower, suddenly they have more time to think about all those things. And usually when they have more time to think about all those things, they nail it. And that, I think, is as close as you can get to eavesdropping on their practice sessions. That ended up being a really long video. I'm gonna have fun editing that down. But anyway, I hope that was helpful for you guys. Please, if you have any more questions regarding this topic, put them in the comments below. I want to make a quick shout out to my friend Aidan Wong. He is a composer, and you may remember his name because I played one of his pieces, I think. A lot of you guys were asking for the sheet music for it for the longest time, and he finally launched his website. I think you can buy the PDFs off of him. I will put his link in the bottom bar below as well. Go check that out. So if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you give me a big thumbs up and hit subscribe for new videos every Saturday. My last video is over there, and if you want to catch me during the week, my social media networks are down there. But otherwise, I will see you guys next week. Bye. This is another story about Paul Hung. Paul played the Concerto in G, first movement, for a studio masterclass one time at UBC, and he was very nervous. On top of that, he just had caffeine. I think he just had a bubble tea right before, and he went, I think, double speed. It was impressive. That's how Paul learned that anxiety makes you play really fast. He played it perfectly too. Like,